Hi, this is Ben Schwellen. Today, I'm giving you a talk about the Celts that your parents should have had with you when you got involved in this. On this channel, a lot of you comment in the comments about some silly stuff, and I'm going to come back and set the record straight about what Celts are. Actually, I'm going to set the record straight about what Celts are not. There seems to be some confusion here, and it's probably because when some of you were teenagers and got involved in Celtic, your parents didn't sit down with you and explain what that actually is. So let's go through that now. When you get interested in a culture, you take on an identity. But what happens when the culture you're interested in is not actually a culture? That causes issues that can destroy your life. And I hope this video saves at least one of you from going down this little rabbit hole of thinking that Celtic is a thing, when it's really not. Now be aware of these two words, cult and Celt. One's from Greek, ancient Greek, Celt, Keltoi, and one's from Latin, cult, when religion was coming in. We've seen where ethnic identity can go astray and wrong in history. Let's ignore Germany, we all know that one. Look at what's going on in Ukraine. At this moment, a war is going on because of some mythological pan-Slavic unity idea that some weird ex-KGB spy has. Because he went down the rabbit hole of thinking that Slavic is a thing and that they emerged out of the Kiev Rus, and that this holy people is a unified singular thing. And take that to the Celts. The Celts are no unified singular thing. In fact, I'm going to tell you now that they're not really a thing at all. Let me go through that. And to begin, look at J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. He had this to say about the term Celtic. Celtic is a magic bag into which anything may be put, and out of which almost anything may come. Anything is possible in the fabulous Celtic twilight, which is not so much a twilight of the gods as of the reason. When he wrote these books about the hobbits and so on, and incorporated elements of the Welsh language into them, he was astutely aware that he did not want to belittle the Welsh culture and the Celtic nations by having people absorb that literature as being that culture. It clearly is not. And what he meant by this Celtic is a bag is that people appropriate things from vastly disparate cultures and avenues and fantasies and throw them in the bag of Celtic, mix them around and pluck them out and saying, oh, anything Druidic and pagan in Western Europe must be Celtic. That's absurd. I mean, the ancient Greek Celtic, Keltoi or Celts, simply meant uncultured people to the north. That's all it meant. In my tense, in my belief, Celt is tied more to the language. Now there's different arguments for or against that. But Edward Llwyd, the linguist of the 17th century, and many other feats of science, coined the term Celtic languages. And he assimilated this into being both the Irish branch and the British branch of the Celtic languages. And we might as well have a term for them because they are related. But beyond language, Celtic doesn't really exist much. It doesn't exist as a singular culture or entity. Shared values between them are almost, well, I would argue non-existent, although I'll get to that in a minute, that many people think they do exist. And it's important that you are aware that people will manipulate you politically if you think that Celtic is a thing and you're drawn in by it, and they will tell you what is Welsh or what is Irish to amass political gain. And you need to be aware of this so that you do not get manipulated as you further your interest and so you can think for yourself. For example, I mentioned the pan-Slavic thing, but one that's a bit probably more analogous is the Native American. You have Cherokee, Navajo, Snoqualmie, the people of Chief Seattle, the Mi'kmaq on the coast of Nova Scotia. These people are from cultures and languages as distant from each other as the Berbers in Morocco are to the Finns in Finland and the Greeks and the Irish, even more so in some cases, but you get the idea. And Celts at one point were as distant to each other as that. You had Celts in Asia Minor and present-day Turkey, in Spain, far up into northern Britain, and even bits in present-day Hungary and southern Germany. And to address them as being one thing, it belittles not only their memory, but what we can take and learn from these surviving Celtic-speaking cultures. Take the Native Americans on the old Looney Tunes cartoons. You'd have a guy with a tomahawk and feathers and a teepee, no matter where they were in North America, when the tribes and nations who had teepees were very limited and very specific. Most Native Americans did not have the teepee thing, so that's a bit strange. And the same thing happens often in films. You have post-Roman Celts wearing kilts, when the kilt was an invention recreated out of, yes, Scottish garb, but it was not a thing that plied pattern in the post-Roman era, certainly. We know that. And yet it's taken to absorb these different traits and features into a cartoon character that belittles the Celtic peoples today and the fact that they have a distinct heritage, each one, that's remarkably different from each other. For instance, the Druidic idea. That has nothing to do with Celtic cultures. We have distinct and separate religious histories. Breton, or Brittany, and the Irish, they have a Catholic heritage. Welsh and Cornish did, but we evolved a non-conformist Protestant heritage later. And today, there are Welsh speakers who follow the Jewish faith, Muslims, people of various faiths. In South Wales, the Jewish heritage is very long in its history, and one of the oldest mosques in Britain is down in Tiger Bay. It's important we understand this, that Celtic is not some cartoon character we paint to dance to tunes on Disney. That's insulting and belittling. And if you get led down that path, yes, you'll be able to see it later on after you learn a Celtic language. But what it will do then is allow people to politically manipulate you and say, oh, our culture is more collective, when no nation or people are more collective or individualistic than another. It is simply those who rule who give a pattern, or if you vote in parties in your culture, it's because of different external influences. Wales does tend to vote social democratic, but it's not because of a national caricature or sentiment. It's an expression of nationality. In reaction, you can be conservative or British conservative and entirely Welsh. Many are. You may not like Alan Cairns, but he is a Welsh-speaking Welshman and has done things for Wales, whether you agree with them or not. And that is part of our culture. Over in Ireland, Leo Varadkar, I don't know if I pronounced his name right, member of Fine Gael, he's a liberal conservative, and that's an equal and absolutely important part of both of our cultures. And so we are not one thing spiritually, politically, not even in architectural senses. Like, you get the teepee thing and it doesn't express Native America. And also there's this sense of social justice warriorness to the Celtic underdog struggle. Well, one thing that might be inconvenient for us today to accept is that the Welsh and Irish owned slaves long after most of England, in terms of the Old World, pre-Africa. And Wales was an extremely hierarchical society under the laws of who the good. Yes, it gave social rights to women and other semi-democratic forms, but it did not change the fact that Wales was an immensely hierarchical, structured society, far more so often than in England. There was not this collectivist paradise. There was not this mass struggle for equality. We, in the Celtic-speaking nations, were like any other nation. No different, no less, no more. And to amalgamate that as being Celtic into a caricature ignores the depth. You have nations. You have cultures, plural. There's no singular Celtic identity. There's no singular Celtic sentiment. No single way of believing in the world. No single spirituality. No single Celtic language, although that may have existed thousands, many thousands of years ago now. Well, a few thousand years ago. But there before that was a singular Indo-European language, coined by a Welshman, I should add. That term, Indo-European. And if you allow yourself to go down that road, then you're in danger of not seeing the true depth and beauty of cultures like Welsh and Irish as being pluralistic and multiple in form. If you go on Google and type in Celtic fantasy, you see ridiculous nonsense. Rutsch. Ridiculous nonsense. If you just type in Celtic, you might get a football team. Or some Irish person dressed in green with curly red hair drinking a pint of Guinness. Is that really all we are as Celts? That's no more than a bobbing native hula hoop dancer made of plastic sold in as trinkets. Don't let your imagination of fantasy craft another people's identity, because that itself is a form of colonization. The term Celtic, especially in the Romantic era, like from the 1850s, was used to view Welshness and Irishness through an English lens without understanding the depth of our cultures or our languages and where we came from and what we passed through over centuries. It was just a washed over Disney figure. So if you're taking on a Celtic identity, any of you, be aware of that. Don't go down a rabbit hole of identity politics, tribalism, miniature characters that have nothing to do with the Wales or Ireland or Brittany or Scotland, Cornwall or Manx of today. We are so much more than any political struggle or belief or identity. Our histories are so diverse. You can be whatever you want to be through Welshness and the Welsh language, or Irish or Breton. And you don't need to conform to anyone's idea of what Celtic is, because Celtic simply, other than a term for languages as far as I'm concerned, does not exist. Now, that may influence people who feel Galician in northwest Spain, and I have a lot to say on that matter, and that's perhaps another video as to discuss, is Galicia Celtic? And if you want me to make a video about Galicia and if they are Celtic or not, let me know down in the comments. The point with Galicia is that the term Celtic is so abstract. We have Goidelic for Irish-based Celtic languages, and Brythonic for British-based Celtic languages. But dig beneath Celtic, and you don't really have anything there in Galicia that's post the Swibby, the Germanic people that came in after Rome. You have nuances and vague influences, but that ambiguity is part of the issue that we need people to avoid when discussing and dealing with Celtic culture. Ambiguity. Cultures are not ambiguous. Cultures are not mystical and mythic and full of druids and spells. Cultures are real. They are modern, they are here, they are concrete, they are things you can define and take lessons from today. If you have to construct characters of cartoons to define a culture, then you don't really know anything about it. And that's why I would sincerely hope that when you take on a Celtic identity, you're very aware that that's the same thing as saying Native American. It's not a nation. Underneath, better Cree, Cherokee, Caddo, Sioux. Underneath that word Celt, there's Welsh, Irish, Scottish, Breton, so on. And trying to amalgamate your identity into being all of those things it's superficial and fantastical. It's quite colonial as well to say that I'm going to define your culture and put anything I want in it. But if you want to be Celtic, you need to choose which of the living Celtic countries you belong to. Let me know in the comments below. Which Celtic country are you interested in and why? Diolch yn fawr am wylio. Thank you very much for watching.